So I'll just mention a little bit about who I am, and then we'll run through the vineyard. My main focus will be discussing just some various attributes of what we do with each variety. I don't want to go into 100 details, but I'll focus a little bit on pruning, what the difference is between a mass selection and a clone, or some people call them field selections, or in Chile and Argentina we call them masal. And then a little bit about malolactic, not too much about wood or alcohol, just in case I get carried away. And then we'll talk about Cabernet for the other half, and talk about how we get a complex wine from one particular site, which is what we do. So just in relation to where we are, Elena obviously knows where we are, but this is my office. This is where I live. This is Dry Creek. Healdsburg's an amazing place because we have Dry Creek, Alexander Valley, Chalk Hill, and Russian River to the south. Where you find the vineyard is I must have moved the slide for some reason, but you head up past Semi Winery, and there's this little road here to the right, which is called Parcels Road. You come down this road, it's about 5 miles, and you end up in this big valley on the Russian River. This valley all used to be owned by the Parcels family, but the Sagacios married in, the Petruccellis, the Foppianos, and all the other bloody Italians that came out of the woodwork and all married to Parcels, and that's why there's a whole lot of big family reunions to go to pick up chicks with no teeth. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. So down here, you can see this is where we get the Cabernet from. The Merlot, which I also harvest, which doesn't come to you, comes from this ranch right in here. And then this is the Chardonnay. And believe it or not, the crazy thing about this property is that they misdrew I don't know if they misdrew the line, but they drew the line correctly. So this is one of the few regions in in Sonoma County where we can either be Russian River or Alexander Valley. So we choose to call the Chardonnay from the Russian River and the Cabernet obviously from the Alexander Valley. That's Pete Sagacio's house. So this is Sagacio's. This is the only property that Pete kept. This is Donna Parcelacqua. This is Fred Parcelacqua. And then if we head on down the road, we'll get to the Foppianos and the Petruccellis. The reason why we call the name Set in Stone, for 2 reasons. One of them was pretty obvious, and the second one was a little bit more detailed. The first is obviously the vineyard is full of stones. It's glacial rock that came down off the hills. It's glacial rock, but it's kind of weird. I don't know if you know this, but Mount St. Helena was the thing that blocked off the Russian River. So the Russian River formed the Napa Valley, used to flow into San Francisco Bay. There was an earthquake, Mount St. Helena got lifted up, and there was a second earthquake, which was really the important one. There was a big mudslide that came off Mount St. Helena, and that's what blocked the Russian River, and that's why the Knights Valley is where it is. And this piece of land is on that same bench that the Knights Valley is on, except we've got the Mayacamas that run right through it. But so that's where the name Set in Stone comes from. And then secondly, we're increasing the amount of concrete that I use on the Chardonnay. And in fact, the symbol on the label, a buddy of mine is a concrete manufacturer in New Zealand, and he uses that symbol, and that's where we originally came from. And then we realized, of course, it's the Saints football team as well. So extra benefit. Those are the labels. And this is a closer look at the vineyard, which we'll describe in a minute. I think I still have this video up to show you, but we'll look at that later. Oh, sorry. I just want to show you, this is the Chardonnay right here, which we'll look at. And what I'm going to focus on is discussing of mass selections, and then we're going to look at cane pruning, what that means, cane pruning versus spur pruning. That's true for Chardonnay, but also for Cabernet as well.
G'day, Nick Goldschmidt here. I'm standing out here in one of our vineyards, and I thought that I'd just show you the difference between a split, horizontal split, and what we look for in our new vineyards, which is VSP, or vertical shoot positioning. We're moving more and more away from this sort of architecture because we have to make bigger cuts, and this is what we used to call spur pruning, or we call spur pruning. And with big cuts we get more eutypa. On this side, we're moving more to this as we get global warming. This makes it more interesting for us. I only make smaller cuts, I don't get so much disease. I can prune a little bit later, so we've got the sap running, and then the buds push a little bit later in the season. So it's delaying maturity, and that's what we have to do as we go into global warming. Anyway, I'm going to do a quick couple of videos on comparing pruning of these two types. Stay tuned. Nick Goldschmidt here. I'm here to discuss the difference in spur pruning and cane pruning. And this is an example of spur pruning. This is the spur that was left last year. It's a 2-bud spur. We had 2 shoots coming out of that. And this is what we call a water shoot or a non-count shoot. So I'm actually going to take this one off this year. And I'm going to take the spur off, and I'm going to come back to 2 positions. So that's the way we prune a spur position vineyard.
And you can tell that that is really a fast way to prune, and you don't need to be very intelligent to prune like that either. Whereas cane pruning, as you're going to see in a second, is a lot more complicated. If I can get it to run. Okay, seem to have got it frozen here. Hadn't had this before, Bob. Interesting.
A little bit more intelligence. So what we do is we take off from fruit from last year. I'm looking for 2 canes to lay down. So I'm taking off some of the canes that we don't want for this year. I've got 2 that are identified. I leave a 2-bud spur position as a replacement spur in case I run into problems next year. So these will be the 2 canes that I lay down for the season. As you can see, it takes a little longer to pull all the wood out, and you have to have a fairly good IQ and understanding what the architecture of a vineyard is going to look like. I will be laying these 2 canes down for the vintage.
So you can see it takes a lot longer to prune like that, but the advantage is that during the season we do way less canopy work. So we're not going to go into detail about that, but I do these video webinars every Friday, and the one tomorrow will be on that. But it's a little bit more tricky, but with the shortage of labor that we're going to have during the season and the price of labor that's continuing to go up, it's better for us to do more work in the winter than it does in the spring, and because we've got less labor available. So let's just stop sharing for a minute. I just want to show you guys what I mean by mass selections. So what happened was back in the and this is, we're talking about right now, we're going to talk about Chardonnay, but this is also true for Cabernet as well. So what happened was in the early times, basically this really started revamping after Prohibition, but got a lot more fussy sort of in the 60s, because we didn't have nurseries like you guys can go to the store now and buy a plant. Well, we couldn't do that back in the 60s, and what we did was we do it ourselves, and we used a thing called chip budding. So I'm going to tell you what chip budding is. So we have a vineyard, and what we do is in the winter we take a cutting. When we do the prunings, we take a cutting that's got 3 buds on it. A stick has got 3 buds. We throw it in the cool room. We wrap up about 50 of them in a bundle, and in the spring we bring them out, and we have these sticks. So we get a knife and we chip that bud out, and this is where the name chip bud comes from. So we get a knife, we cut the bud out of there, and then we get the rootstock, which in those days was AXR1 and 1202, and we make a little T in the bark. We'll peel the bark back and exposes the cambium layer, and we can put the chip bud in, we tape it up, and we can grow Chardonnay, no problem. So this was cool, and it was very easy to do until winemakers started going into the vineyard, and they said, you know what, this vine, this vine, this vine, they taste different to all the other vines in the vineyard. So we just selected cuttings from those 3 vines, and let's say they were more pineapple-y, and that's what we got. And we had names for these things, and we could reselect for the same thing. We could say, you know what, these 4 vines are even more pineapple, and this became pineapple-y squared. Okay? So, the way we describe these things is, if you think about today with Chardonnay, the problem that I got with Chardonnay today is it's all the same shit, because it's all from clones. So I'm going to explain the difference between what we had and what we have. Okay, so what we had was we had warm fruit, cool fruit. Plain warm fruit would be like pineapple, melon, stone fruit, pip fruit like peaches and pip fruit like apples and pears, citrus, and then we got down to grassy. The other two terms we talk about are the structure of the wine and the texture of the wine. We can falsify whatever way you want. On structure, if this is your tongue, a wine that's structural is a wine that comes in the mouth broad and then has a very tight finish. If you think of Vino Verde or something like that, that's sort of what a very structural wine would be like. And things that affect structure are the carbon dioxide, the temperature you serve the wine at, wood, and obviously acidity. Things that make a wine more textural, broad on the entry, broad on the finish, is pH, which I don't want to get into a discussion about hydroxyl ions, but alcohol, fruit, malolactic, and of course, as George was experimenting earlier, fructose or sugar. All right, George? You with me? All right. So the names for these guys were, we had Spring Mountain, Rude, Sea, Wenty, Batto, Mount Eden, Calera. So this is an example of the sort of plantings or these mass selections that we had back in the early days. All right, everything was really cool until 1989. In 1989, we rediscovered that the French had told us a bullshit story. The French had told us that AXR1 was resistant to phylloxera. Well, it wasn't. Somebody had blended Vitis vinifera into AXR. So there's two forms of Vitis vinifera and Vitis labrasca. Vitis labrascas can live with phylloxera. It doesn't allow phylloxera to live on its roots, but Vitis vinifera does. And so somebody had blended Vitis vinifera, Chard, Cab, Merlot, or whatever, into the rootstock. Okay? So we had to throw that rootstock away. And we brought in the new rootstocks that were pure Labrasca, so Vitis blanderi and Rupestris and some of these other rootstocks and other versions of them. So today we use 10114, 110R, 1103 Paulson, 1616, 48C, 46A, blah, blah, blah. And it depends on what sort of resistance you want, nematodes, magalores, or if you want to live with less water, more water. So we can dial on the rootstocks. Cool. Problem, when we put these mass selections on the new rootstocks, they were no longer the Sagacios and the Petrocellis and the Foppianos. These things were not related. So they started showing virus. We've got leaf roll, stem pitting, corky bark, and a bunch of other viruses. And these viruses basically killed the vine or lowered the yield or had red leaves early. So the scientists said there's two ways to solve this. And this is actually how I got into grape growing, because I'm actually viticulturalist. So I became a winemaker because I got sick of the winemaker telling me what to do. So the first thing we did was we went into the vineyard and we found one vine that for some reason didn't show any virus. And that became clone 1. The second thing we did was, and this is where I got meristem tissue culture, where you take a leaf, you slit the vein, agar plate, grow the vine, take the tip, grow the vine, take the tip, grow the vine, take the tip. Then you put it on the new rootstock, voila, you've outgrown the virus. It's clean. Wonder if we can do that with the current one. I'm not so sure. I don't want to live on an agar plate anyway. So this is why all the Chardonnay tastes the same. Because unlike Bob's family, the definition of a clone is you know who your mother is. You can trace everything back to one plant, Bob. All right? So today, all the Chardonnay you drink, I don't give a shit if it's Dijon 9576 clone, UC Davis 567. It's all the same shit. Because when you drink the wine, all you get is this. How many times does a winemaker get up and say, oh, my wine smells of white peach? That's what you have. That's because it's all clones. Boring as hell. So I never wanted to make another Chardonnay, but this vineyard that's grown down there on this ranch down near the river was never replanted. It's still an AXR1. And there's two reasons it can live. Number one, it's on a Goldridge sandy loam, and the Goldridge sandy loam has no organic matter. And when you have no organic matter, the phylloxera can't live in it. And the second thing is they've continued to play with this vineyard and keep the replacing dead vines, etc. So we're able to make wine from it. So if we were to graph on here what set in stone is, number one, it's the C selection. So it's going to be more melon. Now, if we wanted to add texture, and I'll talk about malolactic in a minute, I could make it really buttery and fat and broad if I wanted, but because I'm a steely guy, because the older I get, the more sensitive, the less sensitive my palate is, so I need good acidity and nice brightness. I mean, I can drink You know, the first time I went to Chablis, I'm in this winery and the winemaker says, "What do you think of my wine?" As he pours the wine from a tank. I go, "Dude, that's great wood, man. I love it. What sort of barrel are you using?" He goes, "Get the hell out of my winery." Because, of course, in Chablis, I didn't know they didn't use wood. And that's that character. You can get that character without being in barrel. But I want to have that lean, minerally, flinty aspect, and that's what I think we get by doing more wine made in concrete. So structurally, we're out here, and because we have this mass selection, stylistically, the wine sits there. Does that make sense? Not that you're drinking any right now, but you should be. Okay, while I got you, oh wait, did I lose any of you? You're all right? You all good? What do you call an Aussie with two girlfriends? A shepherd. All right, so let's talk about malolactic for a minute. This is why they don't let me out on the road and I'm getting cabin fever, man. Lena, make sure you come on by for a cup of coffee. Fred, you can do the same, mate. All right, let's talk about ML. How to piss off a winemaker. Ask him how much wood is in his wine. Ask him how much ML is in his wine, how much alcohol in his wine. Because whatever it is, oh, and the best one is, how many tons per acre? That's a great question. All right, so let's say we're going to talk about malolactic. So this is a half reaction. So if you have malic acid, it goes to lactic acid, right? You guys have all heard of this before, right? Not even if you don't. But this is a bacteria. This bacteria is safe. It's not like Jack in a Box. This stuff you can drink. All right. If you start off with 4 grams of malic, you get 2 grams of lactic. If you start with 1 gram of malic, you get half a gram of lactic. Which one is more buttery? Well, the 4, of course. And this is cool climate. This is cool climate. This is warm climate. So before you ask a winemaker how much ML in his wine, ask him, is he cool climate or warm climate? Because that immediately tells you, is the wine going to be more buttery or not buttery? The second question is, the yeast is fermenting sugar to alcohol. You put the bacteria in, the yeast go into stress because the bacteria can eat nitrogen much more easily than the yeast. So the yeast stress out. But what's really interesting is diacetyl, which you guys have all heard about, which has an ON element hanging on the end of it, and on the end of the diacetyl. What happens is this nitrogen can cleave off and the yeast can eat it. So if you add the bacteria during primary fermentation, the yeast will eat the butter and drive down the ML character. So second question, Mr. Winemaker, when did you add the malolactic bacteria? Okay. Third question, what temperature do you ferment it at? If you ferment it hot, you get less ML. If you ferment it cold, you get more. Fourth question, do you do batonnage and lees stirring, all that crazy stuff that winemakers talk about? If you do that, it also removes some of the buttery character. So if you leave the wine on lees, it sucks up buttery character. If you rack it off and put it back, more buttery character. Okay? And then, I forgot what the fifth thing is, but it'll come to me during the talk. But anyway, that's some of the complication stuff about ML. And so what I say is basically we run a wild ML from November through March. And in March, we had SO2. I'm way more fussy about how much SO2 I add than about how much ML. So we basically, our bacteria goes after the primary fermentation. So we would get buttery character, but because we finish in March, the ML usually then runs about 25–30% of total. So we get a little bit of ML character, but you're not going to see it in the wine because basically we're covering it up with a little bit of the concrete. If we did it in wood, you would see more texture, more weight. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm just going to show you how to, I've never shown Bob, I'm going to do this one, didn't show the other guys this, but this, if this is quality and this is tonnage, you can, and let's say this is 2 ton an acre and this is 8 ton an acre, which is better quality? This is the best quality, but the problem is if you're on a thin soil, the bell-shaped curve can look like that. If you're on a nice big fat soil, you can make the bell-shaped curve look like that. So that's another really dumb question when people ask me, how many tons per acre? It's like with ML, wood, alcohol. I look at the customer and I go, is he smart enough to handle the real answer, or do I just lie? Because it's too complicated. You have to understand at least some of the science before you can comprehend some of this. Any questions? I should have been using my microphone. Hopefully everything will come out clearly. Right, I'm going to jump back on to sharing. So 2018 is the Chardonnay that we're talking about. 2018 was the kind of the end of the drought. So the drought, I mean, 2012, as we know, 2012 was the best vintage since sliced bread. We could handle 2012 every day of the week, but it doesn't come around that often. 13 obviously was the big crop, but it was also the start of the drought. Now remember, the buds, the fruitfulness of the cluster is predetermined 18 months earlier. Okay, so 2013 was a big crop, but remember it had rained in 2011, and so that's why we had a big crop. 14, 15, 16, 17 were all drought years. 16 we had a little bit of rain, which is what affected the 2018, and 2017 we had a lot more rain. But 2018 was really the first vintage where we just started coming off the drought. But unfortunately, since then we're going back towards it because this year we got less than 30% of what we normally expect. So great vintage is 2018. In fact, if we have time, I'll put a little chart up. But basically, when people say to us, "What do you think of the 16 versus 17 versus the 18?" It's like, dude, these are all so close. I mean, how do you even? I mean, we're talking about really minuscule differences. 18 might be a little bit more fleshy. 17 has got a little bit more acid. I don't know. It's that close. This is the vineyard right down by the river, as you can see it. And the evolution of mass selections and clones really came about. So in 1920s, you know, the Italians came here and they did random plantings of Zinfandel, Mourvedre, Carignan, all interplanted, Petit Syrah, all interplanted together, and that was their culture. That's how they came over. When they came over, that's what they wanted to do. In 1933, right after Prohibition, people started planting vineyards separately, and I still have a bottle of 1934 Semi Cabernet, but you guys would probably be more understanding with BV and Inglenook because they had Cabernets back in the 30s as well. In 1960s, we started, most wineries then bottling by varietal, and by 1970 and 1988, as I was alluding to, people were starting to name these mass selections. By 1989, we had to develop these clones, and that's why the Chardonnays all taste the same. So what's important is that the mass selections are all pre-89, but really important to me is the loose cluster. They have a thicker skin than the equivalent clones. And remember, clones were selected to be larger yielding and gathering sugar faster, because with a big crop, you want to get the sugar to accumulate quickly because you don't want to run into, November because we're picking, well, sorry, October because we're picking Cabernet, and November we obviously have rain. So getting fast accumulation of sugar is also important, and that's why clones are less interesting.
Picking Chardonnay out here in the Russian River today. The guys are sorting through it. Beautiful, beautiful old vineyard. We're just wrapping up here, and should get this fruit into the vineyard at the winery in the next hour or so. It'll be fantastic. This is some of the best Chardonnay that we make, and you can see we've got big berries and small berries going in the same cluster. And this is what mass selection Chardonnay is all about. It's beautiful, beautiful fruit. Little melon and subtropical characters will come from this. Fantastic. No clones here, no clones.
Oh, and the last piece, of course, is you can also trick the palate these days by adding, we can actually add malic acid. It's legal to add malic acid. So you can actually increase the amount of buttery character that way. And there are certain wineries that do that. And if you team it up with citric, it's a convoluted answer, but you can actually increase dramatically the buttery character. And obviously some of those wineries are doing that. Right, let's jump into Cabernet. Some of the key elements for Cabernet. Again, this is a mass selection, and you're going to see a video of this particular vineyard and how complicated it can be. East facing is important for everything. I didn't mention it, but it's really important for red grapes because we are harvesting later than Chardonnay, and we prefer morning sun over afternoon sun. As you can imagine, a west facing is going to be a lot hotter. We, because of the style of wine that I'm interested in making, we pick a little bit earlier because I want to keep the natural acidity and I want to stay away from the high alcohols. And then in the winery, which I'll talk a little about, again, drawing some graphs about this stability, which I'm pretty fussy about. And I'll explain why wines move from purple to red to brown to orange, especially at Southern Glazer's warehouse. So this is a video of the, or this is a drone of the Cabernet, and you can see there's 3 very different canopy shapes here. So we have this big dark green area, and this was the confusing piece for me. This is where we make the dense wine, which I'll explain. The reason I didn't understand it was because the canopy is much bigger than the crop load, so basically undercropped. This area here is what the area we make the powerful wines. And this area here is a much smaller canopy and a little bit overcropped, so we have to spend a lot more time in here, and this is where we make what we call the elegant wines. And this is the last view, as Bob knows, of my Suburban that my daughter crashed. So please sell some Set in Stone for me.
Good morning from Set in Stone, Cabernet Sauvignon, Alexander Valley. This is the day before harvest. Little east facing slope, which we like, of course, because that's morning sun. We don't get too much of the afternoon burn as we do on some vineyards, but this is perfect. Relatively old vineyard, planted in 1989, but this just beautiful hillside, just amazing. Let's zoom in and check out a cluster or two. So we can see we've got beautiful, loose, open clusters, so nice, even ripening. And the yield here, believe it or not, is about 2.5 tonne an acre, so very low yield. Anyway, this is Set in Stone Cabernet Sauvignon in the Alexander Valley. Just a beautiful, beautiful day and a beautiful vineyard.
So I'm going to jump into the 3 parts, or how we make this. So what I'm going to describe to you, what I want you to understand is, because we make single vineyard wines, does not mean that the vineyard is, that we can't make a complete wine. One of the messages I've been getting out there, one of the stories that the reason why we got started was back in 2008 when I went out on my own. As you remember, that the economy was pretty bad, and a lot of growers had been let loose from some of our larger friends, Treasury, Constellation, Pernod Ricard, etc. And so a lot of these guys didn't have any route to market. So we started working with these small individual growers and helping them and respecting their grape pricing. And obviously, as time went on, Set in Stone is one of those vineyards. So it's really you know, if you ever get a chance to come out and see us, and I'll take you to the vineyard and you can meet the owner. I mean, it's all part of who we are and what we want to be. So what happened was, if we go back to how the vineyard looked, let's say we've got the rows here, and this is why I like to live. I only work in New World countries. I work in New Zealand, Chile and Argentina and California, and up in Canada in the Okanagan, because those zones are full of earthquakes, and earthquakes make soils different and interesting. I don't know what the hell Australia and France is, big flat pancakes, really washed out soils. But here, we can throw a stone and it'll be in a different soil, just right next door. So that vineyard photo that you saw, you know, let's say sort of we picked that vineyard 3 times and we will get 3 different results based on the canopy size. So as I said, this area here made the dense wines. This was the powerful wines, and this is the elegant wines. And the reason why I stumbled on this idea was back in 1990, I walked into Semi for the first time to make Semi Reserve Cabernet. Semi Reserve Cabernet. I'm from New Zealand. When was the last time you guys had a really good bottle of New Zealand Cabernet? Exactly my point. What did I know about Cabernet? So it took me 3 months to make the blend, and after, I don't know if you guys remember Zelma Long. She was the 2nd female graduate out of UC Davis. She was the first Mondavi winemaker who was not a Mondavi. She was the first of any winemaker in California to do barrel fermented Chardonnay. Dave Ramey was her assistant at Semi, and then Paul Hobbs, and then I came along afterwards. Paul left in 1990, and then I ended up getting the winemaker job because Zelma became president, and even today, she's my mentor. She's an amazing lady. So she said, do you want to work with a consultant? I said, yeah. So I got to work with Michel. He'd never worked outside France back in those days, Michel Roland. So he taught me a couple of things. But one of the most important things is what the definition of complexity is. And he doesn't care if it comes from Cabernet, Merlot, Franc, Petit. It doesn't matter about the variety. It matters where they sit on your tongue. So the elegant wines appear on front of the tongue. The powerful wines provide the flesh and the richness, and the dense wines provide the structure and the finish. And when you have these 3 things together, this is complexity. Okay, so what I did was, you'll see in the video, I took all the elegant wines, powerful wines and dense wines, and then I chose the best elegant wines and made a blend, the best powerful wines made a blend, best dense wines made a blend. Then I had 3 wines and made a blend. I was at the pub by 5 o'clock, and it was the much better wine. And that was the first vintage I blended was 85, which obviously was a phenomenal vintage. And then 86. I mean, 86 was an incredible vintage too. So I was lucky. It wasn't as if it was 88 and 89, which were bad, or 82 and 83. So then we said, okay, if we know these vineyards continually produce the elegant wines, let's go out to where we get the elegant wines from. And so we started making wines differently because we knew, okay, let's back up for a second. This is what it looks like when I go into the vineyard to make a picking decision. When we go into the vineyard, there are 3 things that we look at. If this is time, we have flowering and harvest. Acidity does that, okay? At this point, this is veraison. This is when we start to get an increase in sugar that we call bricks. Bricks is a metric term. 10 bricks is 100 grams per litre. 20 bricks is 200 grams per litre. I don't know what the hell 2.37753 gallons is. The last 2 imperialistic nations of the world can't even agree on the same size of a gallon. No wonder you guys lost that space shuttle out by bloody Mars. 100 feet, drop, $1.8 billion mistake. You guys have got yourselves to blame because you can't even think metric. You with me? All right. At this point, we start to get an increase in flavor. And then the tannins move from green to dusty to dry to ripe. And in Bordeaux, this is 100 days. Okay, but this doesn't happen in California because we have an extra month of hang time. So in a heavy crop, tannins take longer to ripen relative to flavor. And in a low crop, flavor takes longer to ripen relative to tannin. So when we go into this vineyard, in the elegant vineyard, we know the reason why it's elegant is because it's fruity. So the fruit is in a higher concentration than the tannin. We want this distance to be really big. So this is why we pick here at 145 days. Powerful wines, the tannin and the fruit are in the same balance, and we pick at about 135 days. And with a dense vineyard, we don't want this distance to be very far, so we pick it earlier at 125 days. And this was the hard thing for me to understand. I did not understand what a dense vineyard was, because I'd go out here and I'd go green, dusty, dry, 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 raisin. I missed it. But I didn't understand that the canopy was so big, you know, it was basically an undercrop property. The canopy was so big, it drew from the water and the soil, and then when the water ran out, that canopy is so big, it starts pumping from the cluster. And that's why we got raisins and dehydration. And that's when I learned the fine tuning of a dense vineyard is far more important than the tuning of an elegant vineyard. So we had to be really careful. Then when we came into the vineyard, into the winery, we got our tank, we got our seeds, we got our cap, and then we have, you know, we have the wine, and this piece here, where the wine and the cap hang out, this is the most important piece of the tank, because this is where the yeast hang out. This is where the sugar is, the nitrogen, the ammonia, and all the other nutrients that go into making yeast perform well. That's why we use punch down, pulse air, pump over, whatever technique, you know, to try and mitigate that. So with an elegant vineyard, I basically do the same process as traditional California winemakers, which is 30 degrees Celsius. If you want to convert, you add 15 and double. I give a little bit more air, a little bit more pump over, not as aggressive as traditional California. And then during maceration, I allow the temperature to cool to 18 Celsius. So if I did that with a dense vineyard, I would have a big dry tannic monster. So with a dense vineyard, I ferment at 22 Celsius. I give less air, less pump over, and during maceration, I increase to 26 Celsius. All right. You guys are not looking like you're having a fun time. So I'm going to give you a bit of chemistry just to piss you off. And there'll be a test after this. All right, you remember back to your Melbourne 3 glucosides and your flavanols, right? Your little chemistry guys. Remember that chemistry class? That was the one you always bunked, right? You never went. Suddenly, this is going to become really important. Because you know how wines move from purple to red to brown to orange, and then you get crusty shit on the side of your bottles? Crusty shit is no good. That's polymeric pigment. That's flavor and color and tannin falling out. Unless it's your birth year, the year you got married, the year of your first child, get rid of it. It's not going to get any better. This is why wines move from purple to red to brown to orange. So the key component that makes a wine purple is a flavanol. This is the one that's important for wine. And you'll remember this once you see it. Okay, you remember that? This is called an anthocyanin. This is a flavanol. This is a carbohydrate. This is purple. This is what you drink every goddamn day. This is the antioxidant. This is the thing that makes you blood thinner. This is what makes life good. So you have one anthocyanin. You provide heat, light, air, and time, you get another anthocyanin. They join on. This is tannin. This is red. Purple, red. Brown and orange. Drops out. Crusty shit. So I don't let that happen. I do it in the tank. So when Kim Jong-un drops a nuclear bomb and you run to the bunker and you show up with your 1 bottle of Opus or your Nickel and Nickel or your Screaming Eagle or your 4 6-packs of Set in Stone Cabernet, guess who I'm going to let in?
G'day, Nick Goldschmidt here. I'm sitting here with 3 glasses of wine, and everything we do is single vineyard, and the way we get complexity out of a single vineyard is by choosing blocks and styles or working the wines to the way the vines best exemplify themselves. So when I was young, I walked into a room once at a pretty well-known winery with 200 wines on the table. I'm wondering, how am I going to blend 200 wines? I came from New Zealand, I didn't know anything about Cabernet. And so working with a consultant, we figured out the best way to do this is to put them into families. Elegant wines, which are the soft berry fruit wines right up on front of the tongue, the powerful wines which provide the fleshiness and the richness, and the dense wines which give us structure and power. So when we go ahead and line all those wines up, I sorted all the elegant wines together and I chose the best elegant wines and made a blend. I got the best powerful wines and made a blend, the best dense wines and made a blend, and we had 3 wines, all from the same vineyard, all from maybe in the same block or not the same block, but all from the same vineyard. And then we made a blend of these 3 wines, and it was the most complex wine that we could possibly make. So today I continue that process. With elegant wines, we can extract them a little bit more aggressively because we know that the tannins are in a lower concentration than the fruit, so we can extract more tannin. Whereas on a dense wine, if we made wine like that, they become too dry and too tannic, so we lower the extraction and try and make the wines more fruit forward. So if I was to drink an elegant wine, I'm going to get more red cherry, great structure, very forward in the mouth, very, very elegant, very ripe, but good acidity, red fruit, and very forward in the mouth. The powerful wine, I can immediately get it. It's more black cherry, a little bit of walnut, and the mouth is really rich, really full, powerful. Not a lot going on in the front of the mouth, not a lot going on in the structural part of the mouth either. And then the dense wines, much more chocolate, a lot more black cherry, but all finished, very supple tannins, good structure, good acidity. And so when we put the 3 together, hopefully, and it's never 30-30-30, because in a warm vintage, I probably want a little bit more of the dense component, whereas in a cool vintage, I want more of the elegant component. So it really depends on the vintage. And when I put all 3 together, we get the most complex wine we possibly can from the same vineyard. And that's how we make single vineyard wines really complex.
So just a quick wrap up. What we've got right now is the current vintage on the Chardonnay is the 2018. The Cabernet is the 2017. They're VVVVV, vintage vineyard varietal, and they're all vegan. It's a real place, real story, real people. We're not just a negociant. You can come out and see it. You can come and visit. You can touch the grapes. You can hang out with me. In fact, I know you guys are super busy September, October, but that's the best time to come and see me. So if you want to ride around one morning, one afternoon, feel free, man, because it's the best time to come to wine country, and that's when you see all the action. And of course, I used to work with most of the big wineries around here, so I can drive in and out of them if there's a particular winery you want to see as well. They usually yell at me, but they know who I am. So I've worked here since '92 on this particular vineyard. And the neighbors are all the big guns: Lancaster, Silver Oak, Robert Young, ABV, which is right next door, Fourier Cronus on the other side. The wine today, we put limited release, but basically these 2 wines certainly have room to grow. And please take advantage of that. So don't be afraid. Our goal is to continue to put more of the fruit that we crush into the Set in Stone label because it's not going anywhere else. I just want to, those are my contacts. If you want to get a hold of me, that's my email address, my cell phone number. And if you want to get me on Facebook and Instagram, it's Goldschmidt_vineyards. I think Twitter's the same as well. But I just want to finish with the vintage chart. So this is the Nick Goldschmidt version of vintage. So this is, we call it, instead of elegant, powerful, and dense, it's elegant, powerful, and shitty. So elegant vintages, powerful vintages, and not so interesting vintages. So if you ruled out, and if you did this in Bordeaux, you'd have this many good vintages and this many not so good vintages. So this is why I live in California, because we have ideal conditions. So, and if you were to rule out the 80s, I mean, the 80s were real problematic vintages. I mean, 85 and 86 were, or even 84, were all phenomenal vintages, don't get me wrong. But we got sandwiched in with they were sandwiched in with some bunch of mediocre vintages. We jump into the 90s. 93 and 98. 98, even today, the press is saying that they made a mistake on 98. 98 was a way better vintage than they ever gave credit for. 03, and then there's a big question mark about 2011. Maybe it should be over there, but remember, California is the same size as New Zealand, same size as England, same size as Japan. When it rains in Paso Robles, it takes me 7.5 hours to get down there. People forget it's a long state. Well, you guys know because you all live here. So when you talk about the differences of 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, we're talking about very minor differences. 19 and I think 2020 are both going to be more elegant vintages. But basically, we've had an incredibly good run of vintages, and it doesn't come into play. I mean, we don't talk about lowering pricing or changing pricing or increasing pricing because it's a bad vintage or a good vintage. I mean, no one ever talks about that when it comes to California. But when we talk about making icon wines in Chile or Argentina or Australia or in Italy, where I still work, there's a big difference. But we live in a beautiful zone, so I really appreciate working here. I've always admired Bronco. I've always had to work against you guys. I'm so honored that I can actually work with you guys finally. So I'm grateful that Bob chose to bring Set in Stone over to you guys at Bronco, and I'm really looking forward to an awesome relationship with you guys. But please make use of me. I'm here. Call for a cup of coffee or pop by for a cup of coffee. I'm always available, except when I travel 9 months a year when I'm going to travel again, but we'll see. But thank you for your time, and I'll take you off mute, and love to have any questions you may have. Bob, did I miss anything?
No, I think you pretty much covered it. You guys have all tried the wines. I don't know if you've taken them out much. Like Nick says, we have the 17 Cabernet, the 18 Chardonnay. They're both 6-packs. In your book, they're $20 net a bottle, $120 a 6-pack. I don't know if Damon has passed any information on to you guys. He has made an adjustment for by the glass, but he says he's not going to publish it. I don't know why. I guess it needs to be a secret. So on a 2-case deal on the Chardonnay, on premise, which isn't working right now, but it will hopefully soon. A 2-case deal is $16 a bottle. And then the Cabernet on a 2-case deal is $18 a bottle. Nick makes other labels out there, I guess similar quality wines, and he thought those price points would work. So it should be in the wheelhouse. Brad and Lena, you live in the neighborhood. You know what comes out of all the wineries in the hood. So at those prices, I think we're okay. Pull the wines again, revisit them. The Cabernet's really come a long ways from when we first got it. The Chardonnay, I'm not a Chard drinker, but it's delicious. You know, if you guys have any questions, you got Nick on the line, so don't be afraid to ask. He's a great guy and a lot of fun. So any questions? Nope. So
I think price point wise, it's they're right in there, and if anything, I wouldn't say value, but you're getting an excellent one for the price point for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's not too many Russian River Chard. Firstly, there's not a lot of Russian River Chard. Well, this is pre-virus. There's not a lot of Russian River Chardonnays that were out there. Russian River Chardonnay is basically becoming a little bit more like Napa Cab, and most of it was direct to consumer. So then having a Chardonnay at this price point, have a Russian River Chardonnay at this price point that's available in the 3-tier system is pretty unique. Yeah, so I mean, I know you're going up against La Crema, Sonoma-Cutrer, Kendall Jackson. You know, but they're really the only ones that are available in the 3-tier. So it's good to have I think to have another option, and one that's not so flashy, not so big and buttery and whatever.
And the one that's not in every big retailer in the state of California. So if you have somebody looking for something with a little more exclusivity, so
yeah, we've made a living out of not selling the Total. Don't sell the Total, Costco, Bevmo, Walmart, Sam's. Although they all help me get started, don't get me wrong, and I still know the buyers, but you can do whatever you want. I'm not telling you what to do, but I really as the small family growers have supported and helped me through time, so have the small independent retailers have really helped me as well. So hopefully these guys will come out on the other end.
Okay, Martine. Any questions?
I'm good. Thank you, Bob. I'll put it in my bag. I have some samples coming Friday.
About time.
I know.
Yeah, you know that 100 cases you promised, they're not all allowed to be, they're not allowed to be a sample budget.
That's right. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Bob.
Appreciate it.
Okay, see you guys.
Thank you
I'll
all.
be sure to come